How's it going, guys? You are watching Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host, Kyle Brotherson, and today we're going to do the full review of the Beta 300RR. Stick around.
The Italians do know what they're doing. They can make a 300 that pulls hard and screams.
Let's jump right in here. This Beta 300RR is one of the more interesting bikes that I have reviewed, and it's because it doesn't really have a direct counterpart anywhere. This bike is a little bit different than all the other bikes that I've ridden, and because of that, it's actually made it quite fun. Beta's tagline is rideability. They're not the ready-to-race bike. They're not the high-flying bike. At least that's not what their main marketing message is, and that's not how they're tuning at least this bike from the factory. This bike is very rideable. When it comes from the factory, it isn't something that's going to tear your head off, and it's made to do a specific purpose, which is to do some awesome trail riding through wooded areas, through rocky areas, and to give the rider a lot of confidence, to be lower geared and have a lower seat height and be soft on the suspension so that it can give that rider a lot of confidence and help them to get through some of these really awesome places that we like to go as dirt bikers, and do a really good job at getting you through that. And the combination of the lower seat height with a little bit smaller frame, it always feels more to me like 7/8 the size of some of these other dirt bikes that I'm riding, the Shercos and the KTMs and the Hondas and the Yamahas. And so that makes this bike kind of an interesting change up to that segment, and it is a really good package. Something that's really great about this bike is how they've tucked the pipe up out of the way. I don't know how well you can see in this picture here, but they've tucked the pipe up so it doesn't hang so far down. And that means that when you're going over those logs and over those rocky, gnarly sections, you don't hit your pipe as much. The interesting thing is I've taken this pipe over a lot of stuff, a lot of logs, and the pipe is actually, it's barely even bent. And I don't have a KTM in here. I've got a KTM where that pipe is hanging so far down that you bend the crap out of your pipes. With Beta, they've got that tucked up a lot more, and it's a really good setup. So that's a freaking awesome mod that they did, is to bring that pipe up higher so that you're not smashing it all the time. I just got finished taking this Beta 300RR down, up and down, a pretty nasty, really fun technical rocky trail. It's one of those ones where you've got water coming down the trail and you've got tons of rocks. It's like kind of a creek bed, riverbed where you're going up it, and then it opens up into sections where you're navigating trees and dodging huge rocks that are as tall as your front tire and trying to get around things, and there's a lot of places where you can just kind of stab your front tire and send yourself over the bars. And it's just a really fun trail, and that's exactly what this bike was designed for, and it actually did really well. The Beta's got a great seat handle right here that you can grab from other side. This is probably the nicest seat handle that I've seen on any bike. The Sherco over here also has a pretty nice handle, but this one is awesome. It gives you a ton of leverage, and it's not going to hurt your hand to grab onto that. So I love the seat handle. While we're talking about the seat, you can also get the seat off without any tools. There's a button over here that you press, and you can get your seat off really quickly. And so that is really cool. Once you've got your seat off, now you've got quick access to the oil reservoir. This bike has oil injection. So really cool thing about this particular bike is you don't have to mix gas. Yes, it's an awesome two-stroke, but you're not having to fumble around and mix gas. For some guys, it's not a big deal. For me, it's not a big deal to mix gas, but here I can just put the oil into this reservoir and the system will mix it for me. So that's a pretty cool thing. The Beta's got an awesome motor.
This sucker pulled it in third! Woo! This sucker pulled that hill in third! Way to beat Beta!
this motor puts out so much power, and the other thing I love about it is it's fully adjustable. I mean, with one little, minor turn with this power valve adjustment screw here with a 5mm Allen key, you can make this bike very, very docile, or you can make that power valve open up sooner very easily and just turn it into a fire-breathing dragon. And the motor, I've got no complaints on this thing. They did a really, really good job. They designed the starter in the right place. So there's a lot of stuff that they've done really well as they put this motor together and the power plant for this dirt bike. And that has been probably the biggest bright spot about this thing, is how much power this thing makes and how controllable it is. It's a very linear power band. It isn't like super in your face with a really, really gnarly hit. It's a good mix of power, luggability, and just overall a good package. I've really loved the power plant on this thing. And this thing is running bang on now. It's got the Keyin PWK 36S, I think it is, or yeah, 36S carburetor. And it's something that I've had on a lot of the other KTMs back in the day. And so I had jets and needles for the thing right when it came to me, and I was able to lean it out on the main, lean it out on the needle, lean it out on the main. I left it the same on the idle circuit, so it might run a little bit rich on the idle circuit, which is fine. That just kind of makes it, gives me a little extra fuel down there. But it was easy to make this thing run, as far as from a carburation perspective. One of the things that I will say about the carburetor though, in order to jet this bike, I believe this is the one that I had to take the tank off. Yes, it was, because the way that everything is set up, I actually had to take the fuel tank off the bike to take the needle out of the carburetor. Same thing happened with the Sherco. On all the KTMs I've ever had, I've been able to turn the carburetor over enough to get to the jets on the bottom and then turn it the other way and pull the needle out of the top of the carburetor. On this one, I couldn't do that. I actually had to pull the fuel tank off to get enough room to get the needle out of the top of the carburetor. So I wish that would have been a little bit easier. So I guess I misspoke earlier when I said it was easy to jet it. It was easy to jet it because I got right on the first time, and it ran really great. It's just that it's easier to jet the older KTMs because you don't have to take the fuel tank off. Let's talk about the gearing for just a second. The gearing is a positive thing and a negative thing for me. I'm gonna start with the positive though. The gearing actually has a real wide ratio transmission, so first gear is actually quite low. First and second gear are quite low for me. I'm gonna call that a positive in this segment because if you're in some really, really technical stuff where you've got super slippery areas or just really big rocks that you're navigating and technical obstacles, having that really low first gear can be a benefit. And it's a benefit to a lot of riders because a lot of riders think that if the bike is geared too high, it's gonna make them harder for them to keep the bike running through certain places. And so the gearing can be a certain positive. I'll talk about that later as a negative in just a minute. I really like the trip computer that comes with the bike. I like to know how far I'm going. I'm kind of a numbers guy, and it's nice to know how fast you're going. It's nice to be able to see how far you've gone, and so I like the trip computer. I like the hydraulic clutch. I've had really, really good use with this thing. I've been able to modulate the clutch and had really good feel, and so that's been a good positive. It's kind of nice for a lot of guys that this bike has a smaller overall feel. I know we've talked about that in other videos, but this bike feels kind of like 7/8 the size of the other dirt bikes that I'm riding. It's got that lower seat height, but it also just feels shorter and more compact when you're on it. And I think if you're a guy who's basically, under 5'10", if you're in the 5'6" to 5'8" range, you're gonna feel really comfortable on this bike, so that's a good thing. It also comes with a skid plate. I think all off-road bikes should come with skid plates, and this one does straight from the factory, so there's another plus. One more thing I like about it is it comes with the full FMF exhaust. We've already kind of talked about how the exhaust is tucked up, but it also comes with a cool, exhaust FMF silencer on the back. So those are all good things. Let's talk about some of the things that I'm not as excited about. The front brake. The front brake is a Nissan front brake, and for whatever reason, I have had a hard time keeping this thing from trying to kill me. It just kind of grabs. It's like it wants to, you're pulling it just a little bit, and as soon as you give very much pressure on it, it just like kind of grabs and wants to lock up that front brake, and there's not a lot of feel, and I've ended up wiping my front tire out multiple times. What was your problem with the brake?
It was, you would get to a point where you're just starting to pull in if you're going down a hill or something like that, or around a corner, and then all of a sudden it just started to pinch, and so it would cause your front tire to go down, and it wasn't a nice consistent, you know, stopping power.
So when you're talking your front brake, you're applying more and more pressure, and then all of a sudden it would just grab a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I felt like. And the other thing,
guys can say, oh, maybe it's your tires. I'm running stock tires on a lot of different bikes, and this bike I had a major problem with that. I didn't have that same problem with other bikes that were running this exact same front tire. So the brake is something that's kind of bugged me. I don't like how they have the kill switch on this bike. The kill switch is up here on the front, so you have to bring your index finger off the clutch and then come over here and grab it, and it's just awkward. I hate that. Down here, you'll see where the kill switch should be is a horn. So that's, I get it. I get that this bike is gonna go ride a bunch of streets in Europe or something, I guess. But here in the US, send us a different thing. I mean, some guys might make this thing street legal, and even if you did go street legal, put the horn up here or the horn down here. Don't put the kill switch, or don't put the horn right where the kill switch should be. These two buttons need to be swapped. It's a dirt bike, man. Also, it doesn't come with handguards. A bike like this that's supposed to be a woods bike and an enduro bike does not come even with any flag style handguards. I think that's a must. When you don't have handguards on, you're getting whipped with trees and willows and brush, and it just hurts your hands. And so I ended up having to install these Cyclo Rebound handguards on here. These do not come stock. You don't get any handguards on this bike, and I think that's a little bit of a miss. Here's another shot of that horn here, but I wanted to talk about the map switch here. The map switch is cool because you can put it into you know, soften the hit on the motor, or put it back to full power mode, and I like that. But what I don't like is the placement of this, because I found that there's a number of times when I'm doing a wheelie, getting up over a log, or I'm going through a tricky section, or I about buck myself over the front of the bars, I've hit this switch without realizing it. Happens to me on the Sherco as well, and I end up bumping that with my chest sometimes, just coming like up so high on some obstacle, and I bump this and I don't notice it. So I'd prefer these map switches to be in a little better protected place. If I was keeping this bike much longer, I think I would turn this all the way up, so it's a little bit harder to hit. I don't know exactly where the right position is, but it just makes it so it's easy to hit that without realizing it. Let's talk about the gearing again for just a minute. I mentioned before that it's a positive, but in a lot of ways for me it's a little bit of a negative. It's got a very low first gear and also a low second gear. And the problem that I have here in the western United States is a lot of the terrain that I'm riding is dry and very rocky and very loose. What that means is it's better for me to keep a little bit more speed and a little bit more momentum up things in order so I don't break traction. And what happens with this bike with the really low gearing is, in order to go the right speed in first gear to get through a lot of the stuff that I want to get through when I'm suffering for traction, that means I have to be really high RPMs. And it doesn't matter if I have the map switch on soft, it doesn't matter if I have the power valve, you know, set in where the exhaust valve doesn't come open. I have to be high enough in the RPMs that it's very, very easy to break traction. And so I'd prefer to have a higher first gear, because I can get better traction if I'm carrying a little bit more speed with a lower RPM. It's one of the reasons why I like to shift up to second gear. So then that's your recourse, is to shift up to second gear. Well, second gear is lower gear than a lot of the other bikes that I'm riding right now. And so it doesn't give me quite as much speed as I want in second gear to keep those RPMs low. And so the gearing is just, this bike is not designed exactly for me, the type of rider that I am, and the locales that I'm riding in. In certain areas of the country, in certain areas of the world, this bike would be money. And I know that they've made it like that because it probably is money for a lot of riders in a lot of locations. It just isn't money for me in those locations. Speaking about the suspension now, the suspension for some riders, this thing would be awesome. Specifically, like my dad loved this bike. He rode it for a little bit. He was very comfortable on it and liked it a ton. For me though, the suspension left a little bit lacking, specifically the front fork. I was adjusting the front fork clickers this way and that way and compression and rebound, and I never could find a position on that front fork where I felt like the front tire wasn't trying to kill me. When I would be going down things where it was rocky and I had a lot of obstacles to mess around with and to navigate, it just seemed to kind of deflect on me and to skid out and wash out, and I never could find a sweet spot where I felt comfortable on that front fork. I was always, in all of the time that I've been riding this bike, I've always been concerned about what is my front tire going to do right now, and I've never felt like I got into a groove. On the Sherco I feel like that, on the KTMs I felt like that, on all the Yamahas that I've done and the Hondas and different things that I've done, I've been able to find kind of a happy spot on the front fork. I haven't been able to find that on the Beta. This is the Sachs front fork, and I just haven't been comfortable with it. And the chassis together with the rear shock, when I've gone out in the desert, this is not a desert bike. When you go out on the whoops on this thing, it's trying to buck you off and trying to kill you. Now I'm not gonna downgrade the bike for that, because it isn't a desert bike. This is not a desert bike, and it shows when you're out there in the desert where the speeds are higher. When you click up into third gear, fourth gear, and fifth gear out into the wider open terrain, it suffers a little bit. The bike's like, I don't really want to go this fast, and it'll about buck you off. So because of those reasons, this isn't the bike for me. I want a bike that is a little bit more versatile in some of those different locations, so I can do some of the gnarly stuff and I can do some of the wide open stuff. And this bike is more purpose built for the slower, gnarly stuff, and so for that it does a really good thing. For me though, I want a bike that is a little bit more versatile. I bet you that the race edition of this bike would be a little bit more like that, where I'd feel a little bit more at home on that, but I did have those gripes on this one. You know, Beta has made a really cool bike here, and I think that this bike fills a niche that a lot of the other bikes don't fill. This bike is rideable straight from the factory. It's more rideable than a KTM 300 XCW. I've had those bikes, I've had multiple of them, and I think that this bike is probably a better fit for a little bit shorter rider. It's a better fit for a little bit newer rider, and it's a better fit for a little bit older rider. It's an amazing bike. It does so many things well. It isn't my favorite bike, and that's totally fine. It doesn't matter if it's my favorite bike. What matters is if all those things that it does well, if those are things that you're looking for, then I say go for it, because Beta has put together a very solid motorcycle here. The build quality is fantastic. The design is fantastic. The things that they've done to this bike, they've done them on purpose for a reason, because it fits a wide demographic of riders out there that are going to love this bike and fall in love with it, and it's going to be all they'll ever need. This bike is more capable than I am, much more capable than I will ever be, and much more capable than 99% of the people that are ever going to watch this video. This bike will do more than enough. It has more than enough power. It can go fast, it can go slow, it can do all those things. And if there's a problem with the suspension, get it revalved. Get it revalved to make it work for what you want to do. Everything that you need here, is here, and it's a solid platform and it's a solid package. And if you go with the Beta, you're going to be fine. I think if you've watched this far, you know it's a good bike. It's a really good bike. And I've nitpicked on some things, I've also praised some things, and this is an honest review, guys. I also want to thank Beta for lending this bike to me to do this review. As most of you know, this is not a bike that I purchased. It is the first bike that I have reviewed where I have not paid for the thing. And so I say thank you to Beta for stepping up to the plate and providing this loaner bike for us to do some testing on. It's been awesome, and Beta has been a fantastic company to work with. I've really enjoyed all the interactions that I've had with Beta, and I really hope that we can continue to do some of these on some of their other bikes, some of the 4-strokes, and even the race edition of this bike. So anyway, thanks for everyone for watching, and I hope that you've learned something, and until next time, we'll catch you later.
That's a good bike.
You heard it from Sam. He said a good bike. And I have to beep every one of these swear words out. There we go. Peace out, guys.